أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Lesson number 219, Surah Al-Ahzab, ayah number 9 to 27. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who have believed, اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم. Remember the favor of Allah upon you. Which favor? إذ جاءتكم جنود, when armies came to attack you. فأرسلنا عليهم ريحا وجنودا لم تروها. And we sent upon them a wind and also armies that you did not see. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرًا. And ever is Allah of what you do seeing. As you know, the name of the surah is Al-Ahzab. And why is it called Al-Ahzab? Because it was revealed with regards to the battle of Ahzab, which is also known as the battle of Khandaq. And the verses that we're going to study today, these verses are about the battle of Khandaq. So before we study them, it's good to review this battle. I'm sure all of you know about it already. You know about the details, you've studied it before, but it's better to refresh the battle in our mind so that we can understand these ayat in a better way. Remember that this battle, it took place in the month of Shawwal, 5 years after Hijrah. So when did it take place? 5 years after Hijrah. If you think about it, already there had been 2 major battles. Which ones? Badr and Uhud. Major battles. But besides them, every year, every few months, there was always some sort of conflict between the Muslims and the Mushrikeen. After the battle of Uhud, so many conflicts took place. Small ones, but still, they had severe consequences for the Muslims. Muslims had to suffer a lot. But we see that in the 5th year, what happened? This huge, great battle took place. And it was a battle for which the Muslims were not as well equipped as their enemy, just as the battle of Badr and Uhud. The Mushrikeen, they were fully prepared, fully equipped, and the Muslims on the other hand, few in number, not fully prepared, not fully equipped, but still what do we see? That the Muslims were victorious with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they had to suffer and they had to endure great difficulties, great hardships for a very long period of time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His help towards them. Now the question is, why did this battle take place? We learned that the Yahud who used to live in Medina, remember there were 3 tribes, and of them were Banu al-Nadir. And they had been exiled from Medina because of their violation of the contract. And they had been exiled by who? By the Prophet ﷺ. So once they were exiled, they had settled in Khaybar. And obviously you can imagine the kind of grudge and hatred that they were developing for the Muslims. So what did they do? They went to Makkah to speak to the Quraysh, to speak to the Mushrikeen, in order to incite them that come and attack the Muslims and finish them completely. You defeated them at Uhud. You're so much more powerful than them. And they're so weak. So you can easily attack them and finish them. So what happened? They went to Makkah. They spoke to the leaders of Makkah, including Abu Sufyan. And what happened? They managed to convince them. And after visiting Makkah, these Yahud, this group of them, about 10 in number, some say more, some say less, they went to other tribes of Arabia as well. So they went to the tribes of Ghatafan and different areas. And what did they do? They tried to convince them as well in order to come and attack the Muslims all together and finish them. And this is why this battle is known as Ahzab. Why? Because Ahzab is what? The plural of Hizb. So it wasn't just that the Mushrikeen were coming, the army of the Mushrikeen of Makkah was coming. No. The army of many different tribes from all over Arabia, all of these armies were coming. And who incited them? It was the Yahud. And we see that some, they readily agreed to come and attack the Muslims, but some weren't willing. Because obviously it meant that they had to spend a lot. So the Yahud, they even bribed them, that we will give you this much money, we will give you this much crop. Because Khaybar, they had a lot of farms over there, right? So they bribed them that we'll give you this much, you come and fight, and we will aid you, we will pay you for it, but just come and fight along with us. So we see that of those people who came in order to attack the Muslims, what happened? Some were willing, and others weren't that willing. Why? Because they had to spend a lot. It wasn't really a good season. It was winter. It was cold. And with the past experience with the Muslims, they had seen that the Muslims, despite being weak, they were capable of overcoming their enemy. So some were willing and some were unwilling. But eventually what happened? An army that was 10,000 in number. Just imagine, 10,000. They came towards Medina in order to attack the Muslims. So this is what is being mentioned over here. That Ya ayyuhal ladina amanu, O you who have believed, udhkuru ni'matallahi alaykum, remember the blessing of Allah upon you. That when these 10,000 people came, what did they do? Because at Uhud, what had happened? The Muslims, they went out in order to fight the enemy. And what did the Prophet ﷺ want? He wanted to defend the city from inside. Now, at Khandaq, at Ahzab, the Muslims, many of them, they did not wish to go outside. Why? Because previously, they had convinced the Prophet ﷺ to do so and they had suffered. So they wished to stay inside and only defend themselves. But if you think about it, if an army of 10,000 people is approaching, how can you defend yourself? In your own city, in your own houses. It's difficult, isn't it? So what happened then? There was a lot of discussion amongst the Muslims. We see that only about a week before the mushrikeen reached Medina, the news reached the Prophet ﷺ. So basically they had only 1 week to prepare. Only 1 week. And the Prophet ﷺ, as his usual habit, he discussed with the Sahaba as to what they should do. And everybody was suggesting we should do this, we should do that. And Salman al-Farisi, what did he suggest? Because he was from Persia. That whenever we are under attack, what do? We dig around our city trenches. Why? In order to defend the city. Because then what happens? If there's a trench, a wide, deep trench, and also a long one, then the enemy cannot really cross the trench. Obviously, how can you cross a trench with your horses and your camels? And if you stand by the trench, then you can easily defend the city. Isn't it so? Now imagine 5 people standing at the trench. You have less people, but you have 5 people only over there. And there's a group of 100 men on the other side. And these 5 people, even if they're on guard, then can those 100 people cross? They cannot. So Salman al-Farisi suggested this, and the Prophet ﷺ really liked the idea. And the rest of the Sahaba as well, they also appreciated the idea. And remember that this was something that was completely unknown to the Arabs. They were completely unfamiliar with this. So the mushrikeen, imagine 10,000 people approaching Medina. When they come, what do they see? Trenches. Now remember that it wasn't that they dug the trenches all around the city of Medina. That would have been extremely difficult. But the city of Medina is such that on certain parts, there were mountains which were extremely difficult to cross. Why? Solid rock mountains, extremely difficult to cross. So those parts of the city were naturally defended. They were naturally secure. On another side lived who? The Jews of Medina. So like that also, another part of the city was defended, was secure. But there were some parts of the city that were exposed, from which it was very, very easy for the enemy to come and attack. So it was only at those parts that the Muslims dug the trenches. And inshallah you'll see a map later on, which will show to you as to where exactly the trenches were dug, which show to us that the trench was not circular. It was dug at certain places in order to guard the city, in order to protect the city. And these trenches, they were not small in size. They were extremely wide and deep. Because just imagine the Muslims were constantly digging and digging and digging. You know, sometimes if you think about a ditch, a trench, how difficult would have been for the mushrikeen to cross. It was difficult because they were very deep and they were also extremely wide. So the Muslims, what did they do? They began digging immediately. And Salman al-Farisi, he guided them as to how they should be digging. So they dug immediately, and they had hardly finished that, the mushrikeen came. But when they saw the trenches, obviously they couldn't cross them. So what did they do? They camped. Now imagine an army of 10,000 people is camping right outside your city. And they camped there for over a month. And throughout that time, what were they doing? Constantly trying to cross the trenches. Constantly trying to cross the trenches. And we see that some people, some individuals, they actually managed to cross the trench. But what happened? The Muslims fought them. Ali radhiyallahu anhu, he fought them. He killed them. And throughout the day and the night, we see that the Muslims, they were constantly standing on guard. Constantly standing on guard. It wasn't even for a moment that they could leave. Which is why, at a certain time, their salah also got delayed. Why? Because they could not leave. It was extremely difficult for them to leave. If they left, then what would happen? The mushrikeen would attack, they would come, and that's it. The entire city would be gone. The entire Muslims would have been attacked. The entire Muslim army and people in the houses would be under attack. So they had to stand by the trenches constantly in order to guard them throughout the day and throughout the night. And you can imagine that in the desert at night, what's the weather like? Cold. And have you been to Medina in winter? Has anyone been to Medina in winter? Any person? Yes. How is it? It's extremely chilly. Especially at night time and in the morning. I remember once we visited, we went for Umrah and then we went to Medina as well. And I'm like, Saudi Arabia is always hot. Yes, it's winter, it's December, so what? But we were amazed at how one morning we were going for Fajr Salah and subhanallah, it was so cold. It was so cold that literally we were shivering. And we were unprepared for it. Because who goes to Saudi thinking it'll be cold? We were so unprepared for it that we actually ended up with a cold because you're going out, you've just done wudu, you step outside and you walk all the way to the masjid and there's extremely cold, chilly wind that's constantly hitting you on your chest and going inside your nose, and if you're not covered properly, then that's it. So imagine the Muslims had to stand outside in order to guard the city in that cold. So for an entire month, the Muslims, they had to endure a lot of hardship. And inshallah, I'll mention to you some of the incidents that I'm sure you've heard before, but they tell us how much difficulty the Muslims had to endure, and not just the Muslims, but the Prophet ﷺ himself as well. In digging the trench, and on top of that, guarding the trench, and then fearing constantly the attack of the enemy, and the betrayal, the treachery of the Jews on the other hand. So it was an extremely difficult situation. And we see that at this time, food was also scarce. Because imagine the Muslims could not go anywhere outside. Medina, yes, it's an oasis, but still, supply is limited. In Arabia, constantly you have trade going on for food to come in. So, food was scarce, food was limited. There was no communication with the outside world. It was impossible to go outside for any merchants to come in and bring any food. So, with limited resources, extremely difficult situation, this is how the Muslims had to spend their nights and their days. And the mushrikeen were not moving. Constantly they were trying. And what happened then? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped the believers. How? That one person from among the mushrikeen, his name is Nu'aym, he secretly visited the Prophet ﷺ one night. Crossed the trench and secretly came to visit the Prophet ﷺ. And he said, I have become Muslim. Just imagine how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped the Muslims. That from among the mushrikeen, one of the leaders, what happens to him? Allah casts the light of Islam, the light of Iman into his heart. Because previously he had visited Medina and he had seen how the Muslims were, and that had greatly impacted his heart. And it was him who did not wish to bring his people against the Muslims. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ And he told him that he had become Muslim, and he said, tell me what to do. Instruct me, and I will obey you. So the Prophet ﷺ told him that what you do is that create some kind of discord between the mushrikeen. Because right now they have come as Ahzab, united. Because remember, it was the mushrikeen as well as the Yahud. The Yahud had also come. So they have come united. Create some kind of discord between them. They do not trust one another. And then easily their power will be broken. So this is what he did. He went and he spoke to the Yahud. He went and he spoke to the mushrikeen. And this is how he created some discord between them. And what happened? They began losing trust in one another. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent more help in the form of what? In the form of a violent, chilly, extremely fierce wind. Extremely fierce wind. And you can imagine when you're out in the open, even if you have tents, everything is fixed in a way that it's temporary. It's not that solid, it's not that strong. From your tents to your pots to your animals, because you're out in the open. You're not going to go build houses. So with the strong and chilly wind, what happened? The mushrikeen could not stay there anymore. Already, they did not trust one another. An entire month had passed by, and there was no success. And on top of that, the weather conditions were getting extremely, extremely difficult. So when the strong wind came, what happened? They just ran away. They just left. Imagine 10,000 people coming in order to attack, and all of them losing courage because of an extremely strong wind, and they left. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the Muslims over here of His help. That, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, udhkuru ni'matallahi alaykum. When we look back at the Battle of Khandaq, what do we think? About difficulties, about problems. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, remember the ni'mah of Allah. Remember the blessing of Allah. This is what shukr is. That shukr is that you don't focus on what went wrong, but you focus on what went right. Remember the blessing of Allah upon you. Yes, you had to endure a lot of hardship. It was an entire month of fear. But what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed a huge blessing upon you. And remember that ni'mah, blessing, this is used in two ways. First of all, when a person receives some benefit. And secondly, ni'mah is also used when a difficulty, when harm is removed. Like for example, if you get money, what do you call it? Ni'mah. But at the same time, if you were sick and now you're better, what do you call that? Ni'mah. So, اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم, that He removed harm from you. He removed the difficulty from you. When? إِذْ جَاءَتْكُمْ جُنُودٌ, when armies came to you. Why did they come to you? In order to attack you. The word junud is a plural of jund. And jund is used for a band of soldiers, a group of soldiers. So the Ahzab came to you, the Ahzab of the disbelievers, the mushrikeen and the Ahlul Kitab. So it wasn't just the mushrikeen had come, but along with the mushrikeen, the Ahlul Kitab had also come in order to fight against the Muslims. And these junud, they include first of all the Quraysh, the mushrikeen of Makkah, and they came under the leadership of Abu Sufyan. It also includes the tribe of Banu Asad, the tribe of Banu Ghatafan, Banu Amir, Banu Salim. These were all mushrik tribes. And of the Yahud, of the Ahlul Kitab, Banu Nadir, under Huyay ibn Akhtab, they had come against the Muslims. And the Banu Qurayza as well, under the leadership of Ka'b ibn Asad. And along with them, some tribes of Hawazin had also come. So just imagine, إِذْ جَاءَتْكُمْ جُنُودٌ. Remember that the Yahud, they are the ones who had basically incited the mushrikeen. But when they incited the mushrikeen, they came themselves as well. And which was his tribe? The tribe of Banu Nadir. And in Medina, there was still one tribe of the Yahud. And this tribe, the Banu Qurayza, they had a treaty with the Muslims. And what was that? That if Medina is under attack, whose responsibility is it to defend the city? Everyone, regardless of whether you're Muslim, mushrik or Yahudi. Isn't it so? But what happened at this time? The Yahud who had come from Khaybar, the Banu Nazir, they even came and incited the Banu Qurayza that why would you keep with the Muslims now? Forget about this treaty, abolish it, finish it, join forces with us, and all of us collectively will finish the Muslims. So imagine the Muslims, they were facing a threat not just from the mushrikeen who had camped outside, but also the Yahud who were their neighbors, because they had broken the treaty. إِذْ جَاءَتْكُمْ جُنُودٌ, when all of these armies came against you. Why? In order to finish you, in order to attack you. But what happened? How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help you? فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ رِيحًا, so we sent against them a wind. We unleashed against these people a wind. And when was this? After an entire month. And this violent wind, it was a form of help for who? For the Muslims. Remember that the word rih is singular. And what's the plural of that? Riyah. When the plural is used, what does that show? Winds that bring good news, mercy, rain. And when the singular is used, what does that show? Punishment, difficulty, calamity, disaster. So over here, rih, singular has been used, which shows that it was a wind of adhab, an extremely fierce and chilly desert wind. You could imagine extremely cold, extremely fast, and if it's in the desert, what is it going to carry along with it? Sand. And this extremely fierce wind, what did it do? It uprooted their tents, extinguished their fires, overturned all of their pots and pans, whatever food they had, everything turned over. And their animals, they were let loose because of that. You can imagine there was a complete chaos. Complete chaos. فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ رِيحًا وَجُنُودًا, and not just this wind, but also armies. They came as armies against you, and we sent armies for you in order to assist you. But these armies, لَمْ تَرَوْهَا, you did not see them. Who were these armies of? The angels. Just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent these junud at Badr, at Uhud, He also sent them when? At the time of Khandaq. لَمْ تَرَوْهَا, you did not see them. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ, and Allah is ever بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرًا, with whatever that you do, He is ever seeing. He sees. What does it mean by this? وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرًا. Everything that you were doing, Allah was watching you. What does it refer to? Whatever difficulties that you had to endure in digging the trench, in guarding the trench, guarding the city, and afterwards as well. Throughout as well, and also afterwards. Whatever difficulties you had to endure, Allah was watching you. He was seeing you. He was looking at you. You know when you're going through some difficulty, and just the fact that somebody knows, they're looking at you, they're watching you, don't you feel at ease? Of course you do. So we see that the Muslims, they underwent a lot of hardship, but along with that hardship came ease, because إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, with difficulty comes ease. Where the difficulty was a lot, the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was also great, in the form of this wind, and also in the form of the angels that were sent in order to assist the Muslims. And when they were digging the trench, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I was watching you. Remember that this trench that the Muslims were digging, it was not small. It was not small, as I mentioned to you earlier. And at the same time, time was also very tight. They had barely a week to dig all of the trenches. And the enemy was huge. 10,000 men. They were coming. And on top of that, the resources that Muslims had, they were also very limited. Very little food and very little manpower. And because of that, they endured a lot of hardship. We see that Abu Talha radiallahu anhu, he said that once he was exhausted by hunger. Why? No food. Hardly any food. And they were working constantly, day in and day out. During the day, during the night, they were constantly digging, because they had not even one moment to spare. And you know when you're busy like that, even if you have food, do you get time to eat? No. And all of a sudden you realize, I'm crashing. Because I haven't eaten in so long. So Abu Talha radiallahu anhu, he said that once he was exhausted by hunger, and he complained to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about what? Hunger. And he showed his belly, on which he had tied a slab of stone, in order to reduce the uneasy feeling of hunger. He had tied a rock to his stomach. Why? Because he was so hungry, and when you're hungry, what happens? Your stomach begins to hurt, and there's an uneasy feeling, and if you squeeze your stomach, if you press your stomach, what happens? That feeling, it reduces, it goes away temporarily. So he had tied up this one rock around his stomach in order to reduce that feeling. So he complained to the Prophet ﷺ about hunger. And the Prophet ﷺ, he lifted his shirt and he showed him that he had tied 2 slabs of rock on his belly. What does it show? That it wasn't just the Muslims who were enduring the difficulty, but along with them, who was enduring? The Prophet ﷺ as well. He didn't just say, I'll sit here, you guys dig the trenches. No, he dug along with them. He was hungry when they were hungry. He was working when they were working. And this is exactly what is meant over here. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرًا. That whatever sacrifices you were making in the way of Allah, whatever you were going through, whatever difficulties you were enduring, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was watching you. And we see that despite this great difficulty, the Muslims, the sincere believers, how were they working? With a lot of hard work. Constantly they were working, and they weren't complaining. They weren't being negative. They didn't say, I give up, I'm leaving Medina. Nobody said that. None of the sincere believers reacted in this way. Now we need to reflect on ourselves a bit over here. That when collectively we have to work, collectively, and sometimes what happens? One person gets extremely tired, another person gets injured, another person gets hurt, then what is our reaction? What is our reaction? How do we behave to one another? How? Think about it. We become extremely impatient. On the slightest of things, what do? We start showing a lot of anger, and we start saying a lot of negative things. But we see that despite all of this difficulty that Muslims had to endure, what were they doing? Busy working. And the Prophet ﷺ, he noticed that as well, that the believers, they were going through a lot of hard work, which is why we see that once the Prophet ﷺ, he came by a trench that the Muslims were digging, both the Ansar and the Muhajirin, together they were digging the trench. And when he saw them in that cold weather, with all that hunger, they were digging the trenches, without any help of any servants or slaves. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma inna al-aisha aisha al-akhirah, faghfir lil-ansari wal-muhajirah. He said a verse of poetry, that, O Allah, life is truly the life of the hereafter. This life, this is not real life. This is not comfort. The real life is where? In the hereafter. So forgive the Ansar and the Muhajirun. And the Ansar and the Muhajirun, when they heard this, coming from the Prophet ﷺ, they didn't say, yeah, we're going through a lot of hard work. No. You know what they said? They said, نَحْنُ الَّذِينَ بَايَعُوا مُحَمَّدًا عَلَى الْجِهَادِ مَا بَقِينَا أَبَدًا. That it is we who have pledged to Muhammad ﷺ to fight in jihad till the spark of life is within us. Meaning until we're alive, we have pledged that we're going to fight for this cause. We're going to strive for this cause. So it wasn't like, yeah, we're putting in a lot of hard work. No. They didn't consider it as a favor that they were showing to the Prophet ﷺ. Rather, they took it as an obligation upon themselves. An obligation upon themselves. And we also see that Anas radiallahu anhu, he said that if one of them, meaning if the believers, if any Muslim, he found like a handful of barley, like a little bit of food, what would he do? He would grind it, he would mix it with a little fat, so that it would become a little heavy, and then everybody would be able to eat it. This is how much they were concerned for one another. This is how they were working collectively, enduring all the hardship. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was working along with them, motivating them. Motivating them. And the Sahaba, they didn't feel that, oh, this is such a burden on us. No, they took it as their own responsibility. We learned that Al-Bara ibn Azib, he said that on the day of Al-Ahzab, I saw the Prophet ﷺ carrying earth. He was carrying earth. Why? Why do you think so? They were digging the trench, right? So when you're digging the trench, you're taking earth out of the trench and you have to put it out aside. And the earth was covering the whiteness of his belly, of his abdomen. And he was saying, Allahumma lawla anta mahtadayna, wala tasaddaqna, wala sallayna, fa'anzil sakinatan alayna. That, O Allah, without you, we would have got no guidance. We would have received no guidance whatsoever. Nor would we have given in charity. Nor would we have prayed. What is he mentioning over here? The ni'mah of Islam. Because of Islam, they were suffering a lot right now, at this moment. But the Prophet ﷺ, what was he mentioning? The blessing of Islam. That, oh Allah, had it not been for you, we would never have received guidance. This is what shukr is. This is what positive thinking is. That yes, you're going through the difficulty, but what are you thinking about? The good that you have received. The benefit that you have received. We would never have given sadaqah. We would never have prayed salah. And what is life without that? فَأَنزِلْ سَكِينَةً عَلَيْنَا. So, O Allah, bless us with tranquility. Send down tranquility upon us. وَثَبِّتِ الْأَقْدَامَ إِنْ لَاقَيْنَا إِنَّ الْأَعْدَاءَ قَدْ بَغَوْا عَلَيْنَا إِذَا أَرَادُوا فِتْنَةً أَبَيْنَا. That make firm our feet when we meet our enemy. Indeed, these people have rebelled against us. But never shall we yield if they try to bring affliction upon us. We will never give up. These people, yes, they're being very oppressive. They have committed great outrage in attacking us, in coming this way. But we're not going to give up either. So, O Allah, you help us. You make our feet firm. And you send down your tranquility and peace upon us. Think about it. When we're going through a difficult situation such as this, one test after the other, one assignment after the other, what are the expressions on our faces? What expressions do we carry? And what are the things that we say to one another? Some people, mashallah, very, very positive. You look at them and you feel as though no difficulty, nothing's going on. But other people, what happens? On the slightest of things, what happens? We make such an expression on the face that a person who has no idea what's going on, just by looking at us, they'll get frightened. That, oh my God, what's going on in their life? This course is so difficult. So difficult. I'm not even going to think about doing it. But just look at the difficulty that the Sahaba were going through. The Prophet ﷺ was going through. Any negative words on their lips? No negative words. What are they talking about? What are they mentioning? The ni'mah of Islam. Because when a person focuses on the ni'mah, then what happens? The difficulty, the hardship, it seems very, very little. If you focus on the positive aspect, the benefit that you have received, then the hardship seems very, very insignificant. Like for example, if you have been working all day long in your house, cleaning one room after the other, I'm sure many of you had to do that before Ramadan. That you wanted to have everything in order, everything nice and clean. Let's say at the end of the day you were very tired. What did you think at that moment? Oh, my legs. Oh, my hands. No, you look around you and you admire the clean house, everything in place, all the grocery done, the fridge is very clean, the kitchen is very organized, everything is perfectly fine. And just the sight of all of that, it pleases you. Isn't it so? It does. So similarly, when going through hardship, what should we be focusing on? The benefit that we have gained. The benefit that we have received. That yes, we have a test coming up, but alhamdulillah, another juz done. Yes, we have another assignment due, but alhamdulillah, another juz done. One more step towards the completion. So when a person focuses on what he has achieved, what he has gained, then the negative thoughts, they reduce automatically. And this is what we see in the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba at this time. And there are many, many events that took place at the time of this battle that show the difficulty that the Sahaba went through, and also how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them news of victory, good news, which is what kept their morale high, and it lifted up their morale, their confidence, and they were able to endure the difficulties. And one of those incidents is that once the Sahaba, they were digging, and a huge boulder, a huge rock, it was impossible for them to break it. And imagine if you don't break that rock, what's going to happen? Your trench won't be deep enough. Your trench won't be wide enough, so they couldn't even leave it. So they're trying and trying and trying, and they weren't able to break through it. So what happened? They went to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ came, he came down into the trench and he struck the stone with his axe. And that broke 1/3 of the rock. What does that show? The strength that the Prophet ﷺ possessed. And also, it's like a miracle that all of the Sahaba tried, so many people tried, but they were unable to do it. And the Prophet ﷺ came and struck it once, and 1/3 of the rock gone, broken. And at that moment, what happened? A light also came forth, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "Glory be to God, the keys of Syria have been given to me." With the second blow of the pick, the Prophet ﷺ hewed another 1/3 of the rock, and he said, "Glory be to God, the keys of Persia have been given to me." And in the third attempt, the remaining portion of the rock was also broken into pieces. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Glory be to God, I have been given the keys of Yemen." So we see that with each blow, what happened? He was shown a victory that was going to happen in the future. And this gave a lot of confidence to the Sahaba, that where they were worried for their lives, they were concerned that what's going to happen, are we going to make it or not? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them the good news, no, you're going to make through this, and you're going to be more victorious in the future. Not just Arabia, but Persia and Syria and beyond. And you can imagine the difficulties they were going through, but because of this good news, they became more happy, more excited. Another incident that we learn of, that Jabir ibn Abdullah, he said that when we were digging at the trench, a huge mass of rock appeared as an obstruction. And the people went to the Prophet ﷺ and told him that a piece of boulder had hindered their work. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "I'll go down." And he stood up, and as he stood up, and he was going to go down, Jabir radhiyallahu anhu, he saw the 2 stones that were tied on his stomach. And he was overwhelmed. That the Prophet ﷺ is that hungry. He's so exhausted, he's so tired. You know, we learned earlier that an-nabiyyu awla bil mu'minina min anfusihim. The Prophet ﷺ, he deserves more. His right is more because his sacrifices are more. So when Jabir radhiyallahu anhu, he saw the state of the Prophet ﷺ, that he's so hungry, he couldn't take it. He went immediately to his house and he asked his wife, "Do you have any food? Any food?" And he said that we have only 1 sheep, that's it. And we have a little bit of barley. So he slaughtered the sheep immediately, and he said, "Cook, and also the barley, grind it and also make bread." You can imagine grinding the barley and then making bread with that. We have flour that's pre-grinded from before, and we think making bread with that is such a big deal. We have meat sitting in our freezers, and we think cooking that is such a huge deal. Imagine slaughtering it and then cooking. So she cooked. Jabir radhiyallahu anhu, he helped his wife, and then what happened? He went back to the trench, and he whispered to the Prophet ﷺ that, "I have some food, please come." Why did he whisper? Because he wanted the Prophet ﷺ to eat to his fill, because he was extremely hungry. Imagine 2 rocks tied to your stomach. So he went and whispered to him, and the Prophet ﷺ, he said out loud, "O you who are working at the trench, Jabir has prepared a banquet." What does it show? What does it show on the part of the Prophet ﷺ? How caring he was, how concerned he was for his companions. He didn't say, "Okay, you haven't told anybody, right? I'll just go and eat properly. After all, I'm the leader. I have to endure so much. I have to deal with all this tension as well. So I'll go have a good meal so that I can relax and I can function properly because my mind is not..." No, nothing like that. He told the companions, and all of them came and they ate, and the food was enough. The food was enough for all of them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped them. Imagine 1 sheep was enough for so many Muslims, so many of them. And a little bit of barley, even that was enough for them. Because remember that food for 1 is enough for 2, isn't it? And we think food for 2 should be enough for 1. We think the exact opposite. There was so much food that all of the Sahaba present over there, they were able to eat. And Jabir radhiyallahu anhu, him and his wife, even they eat. So we see that the Muslims, they had to undergo a lot of hardship, but with that hardship, what happened? They were positive. They were committed. They weren't negative. They didn't complain. They were grateful. They were concerned for one another. You see, at these times, when we're being tested, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests us. That how do we behave towards Allah and how do we behave towards one another? And how do we prove our commitment with our work? Is it that we become ungrateful, negative about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is it that, we begin to shout at other people, we don't care about them, we become extremely selfish, and we leave our work, and we just want to take it easy and relax? This is just a time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us. And look at how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'een were.